Welcome to the session number 4, tutorial number 4. Acquire project resources, process components. In this video, we are going to discuss various process components of this process. We're going to look at inputs, outputs, and tools and techniques. In the Acquire project resources process, there are multiple process components. These components are categorized under 3 categories: process inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. Under outputs, we have project management plan, project documents, environmental factors, and organizational process assets. Under tools and techniques, we talk about decision-making techniques, interpersonal and team skills, pre-assignment, and virtual teams. At the end of the process, there are many outputs produced. The major outputs produced by Acquire project resources process are physical resource assignments, project team assignments, resource calendars, change requests, project management plan updates, project document updates, and so on. First, let's have a look at the process inputs. The first process input that we are going to discuss is about project management plan. Project management plan is the consolidated planning document that is produced during the planning phase. So in terms of resource management, there are quite a few documents that are included in this project management plan. First, human resource management plan. Human resource management plan describes how resources are identified and used within the project. Second, procurement management plan. Procurement management plan describes how resources are procured and integrated into the project. Whether it's a contract or different procurement, that needs to be planned in the procurement management plan. Cost baseline. Cost baseline defines overall budget for the project. So defining the cost baseline, it will allow the project management team or the project manager to make decisions regarding the resources. The second type of input that we are going to discuss is the project documents. There can be various documents that are relevant and need to be updated. The first, project schedule. When it comes to the resource assignments, resource planning, the resource manager or the project manager will have to look at the project schedule. What are the activities involved? When are these activities being scheduled? All these questions are valid questions and areas that the project manager needs to be aware of before any resource management decisions are taken place. Resource calendars. This is another type of input that is crucially important for planning the human resources and other resources. Resource calendars describe when resources are available and used. Another project document that we will need to work on, consider as an input, is resource requirements. During the project management planning, we will figure out the resource requirements, the needs that the project has in terms of resources. In terms of the expertise, how many resources do we need? For how long? And all these questions can come in handy in making project resource decisions. Therefore, this becomes a valid input for acquiring project resources. Another document that's been updated or that's been considered as an input for this process is stakeholder register. Stakeholder register describes stakeholder preferences, needs, priorities, and expectations regarding utilization of resources. The next type of process input that we are going to discuss is environmental factors. Existing information on resources, availability, competency, etc. will need to be considered as an input for deciding and acquiring project resources. What are the marketplace conditions and organization structure? What are the geographical locations considered for the project? All these things play a crucial role in designing the project resources. The next type of process input is organizational process assets. Any organization will have process assets that can be the input for your project resource planning and acquiring them. Organizational processes, policies, procedures, and standards will have to be considered prior making resource decisions. For example, certain organizations may have very flexible guidelines and regulations around contracting, whereas some of the other organizations may have very strict guidelines and policies implemented in contracting. Therefore, it's an absolute must that you consider the policies and procedures that the company have before you make decisions. You can also look at the historical information. How did the company work on a similar project earlier? If the company had worked on a similar project context, you may reference those information in order to make your resource decisions. And another important input that you need to look at is lessons learned. If there were similar projects conducted earlier, did they learn anything? What kind of improvements they thought they need to do in future will be absolutely great inputs for making the right decisions. Acquire project resources, process tools and techniques. Now let's have a look at certain process tools and techniques used in acquiring project resources. Pre-assignment, selecting project team members in advance. That essentially means prior starting or acquiring the project, there can be pre-assignments done. If you remember, we already discussed this in the previous session. Happens if project depends on specific resources or expertise. The need for pre-assigned resources may happen due to various reasons, and it can be influenced by various other people like sponsor, the project management office, and other stakeholders. Interpersonal and team skills. In terms of acquiring the right resources for your project, you may have to spend your time on this area. Securing optimal project resources often requires consent from others. Functional managers might be involved in your project environment. especially critical in weak and balanced matrix environments. In such organizations, the functional management plays a dominant role. Therefore, project manager has to negotiate and discuss the resource options with the functional management. Discussions with other project teams may need to balance requirements of several projects based on the organizational priorities. If the potential resources are already assigned or working on a different project or projects, it's absolutely critical that you have the discussions around these resources and have common agreements between you and other project teams. You may also have to work with the external organizations in deciding the right personnel and team skills, the right level of expertise, the resources that you need for your own project. Another technique or a tool that we use in acquiring the project is virtual teams. This is particularly true and valid when you have many geographies involved in your project. Rather than bringing down a foreign team to your location, what is possible would be building a virtual team. Virtual teams allow utilization of human resources that might not otherwise be possible. Virtual teams also enable project teams to work across many time zones and geographical areas. Potentially saves on overhead, travel expenses, etc. However, there are a lot of challenges compared to the co-located teams. Another technique that is used in acquiring the project team resources or the resources is acquisition. If required resources cannot be found with an organization, acquisition takes place. You can outsource individual consultants. You can subcontract a part of your work to another organization. But this won't happen if your organization and your team has the right expertise level. When it comes to the virtual teams will enable to form teams of people in widespread geographic areas. This is almost a plus. Add special expertise to a project team even though the expert is not in the same geographic area. Incorporate home office employees. A modern trend is that promoting people working from their own residence. Form teams who work different shifts days. When I worked for a previous company, we almost covered 24 hours using multiple virtual teams. We had teams in multiple locations covering different time zones. Include people with mobility limitations or disabilities. Virtual teams will also promote the utilization of differently able people because mobility is not a requirement. The people can work from their home, their own location without any problem. It also reduces the travel cost. However, the right tools and facilities have to be given to these teams in order to make them more effective. Example, video conferencing facilities. If the video conferencing facilities are not available, the communication might not turn up very effective. If the phone connections are not stabilized, Again, that might be a huge dependency. However, virtual teams have a lot of benefits, and a lot of organizations globally use virtual teams to manage their projects. While there are a lot of reasons why you could develop virtual teams for your project, there are loopholes as well. Lack of direct contact leads to more misunderstandings and conflict. I have come across enough situations where people from different geographies conflict very easily. Requires more time spent on team development and communication than needed for co-located teams. Also, the communication becomes so formal, limiting the teamwork and high performance behavior. Let's have a look at another technique used for acquiring project resources: decision making techniques. There are many decision making techniques out there. You may adopt these techniques to make the right decision. Multi-criteria decision analysis. Potential resources are rated based on several differently weighted factors. Some of these factors include availability. Is the resource able to work when needed? Might their availability be impacted? Cost. Is there a resource within the project budget? Or are they exceeding the budget constraints? Experience. Does the resource have the necessary level of expertise required? Now let's have a look at the process outputs. What are the outputs produced by Aquire project resources process? Out of the many outputs, the first output that you can think of is physical resource assignments. It includes all physical resources assigned to the project, may be represented in various ways. However, it needs to show the physical resources assigned to a given project. Project team assignments. This shows the human resource or the people assigned to a given project situation. Resource calendars is another output produced by Aquire project resources process. When and who are available to complete the work. Resource calendars will show all the activities involved in the given project. Also, it shows the resources allocated accordingly. Change request. Resource selections may affect schedule, cost, risk, quality, and other areas of project. Resource substitution may occur to prevent any changes. Change request will be raised upon any major changes that happen to the resource needs. Project management plan updates is also one of the important outputs produced by the Aquire project resources process. There could be many documents that you may have to update during Aquire project resources process. Out of these documents, it's crucial that you keep an eye on these two documents, which are resource management plan and cost baseline. And project document updates. At the end of the Aquire project resources process, you may update following documents. Lessons learned register includes all the lessons learned during the project. project schedule. You may update the project schedule based on any changes occur during the Acquire project resources process. Resource breakdown structure. Has the breakdown been changed? Did it change any resource assignments? Resource requirements. You also need to update resource requirements documentation. Risk register. Did it introduce any risks? Has the existing risks changed? Do their priorities and severities stay the same? Based on which you will need to update the risk register. Stakeholder register. Stakeholder register lists out all the stakeholders involved in the project. So if there are stakeholders change, you will need to update the stakeholder register. Aqua project resources process will also produce enterprise environmental factor updates. These updates might be crucial at the organization level. So based on the project resource allocations, you may have to update the organizational resource availability. Second, available inventory of organizational resources. Particularly when it comes to non-human resources, you will need to keep the inventory up to date so that the other projects teams and other people in the organization will know what is the existing inventory, what resources are available for their projects. The next process output you may learn about is organizational process assets updates. So under this, we need to focus our attention on the documentation related to resource acquisition, assignment, and allocation. Under process outputs, it's important that we understand one concept called halo effect. Promoting a well-performing resource to a new position that he or she is not qualified is known as halo effect. This may cause schedule, cost, and quality problems. Example, since a software developer works well in your organization, you make him the project manager. This might be a wrong decision to make. Just because he was a great software engineer, it doesn't guarantee that he or she becomes a great project manager. In a nutshell, in this video, we learned about the processes and tools, basically the process components involved in Acquire resource activity process.